Hello everyone and welcome to my The Bold and Beautiful Always channel. Ridge takes Brooke's hand and flees after interrupting Nick and Brooke's wedding. The smell of many beeswax candles, the incense, and the excruciating tension of a moment on the brink of a razor filled the air inside the ancient, sun-drenched chapel set on a Tuscan hilltop. Standing at the altar with her palms quivering a little in Nick's bigger, comforting hand, Brooke was surrounded by the multicolored light coming through stained glass saints. Wearing ivory silk that seemed to shimmer and was embroidered with delicate forget-me-nots, she made a modest yet emotional decision that reflected both the hopeful fragility of this new beginning and the intricate tapestry of her history. Nick was radiant in a fitted charcoal suit, his eyes fixed on hers, and he exuded a love so intense that the cool stone room felt warm to the touch. The priest's soft Latin rhythm swept over them like a holy river, guiding them to the final declaration of husband and wife. As she created this new route, Hope stood beside her mother, dazzling and crying, a live tribute to Brooke's unwavering love for her children. RJ, who was younger but sincere, looked on with wide eyes. Together, Nick's closest pals and a few Logans they could trust held their breath. A picture of hard-won peace following the tempest of Brooke's choosing in the Villa Garden weeks earlier, it was breathtakingly gorgeous. She had selected Italy, Nick, and peace. She had genuinely thought the fight was finished. A storm had come, unnoticed, outside. Not of the weather, but of the intense, all-consuming love of one man. In the shadow of a tall cypress, Ridge Forrester stood, his outline pulsing with volcanic force that had scarcely been suppressed. He had circled like a hawk, worrying, plotting, and wallowing in the pain of Brooke's rejection instead of returning to Los Angeles defeated. The last, intolerable twist of the knife had been the wedding news. Instead of seeing happiness in the chapel, he saw a grave error and the robbery of his future. Nick's loving stare, the calm surroundings, and the golden light all seemed like a hideous parody of the life he ought to be leading with Brooke. He had been shaped into a single, desperate goal by the weeks of loneliness, anger, and unending grief. Stop this. Anyhow. Through the arched window, he stared at Brooke's profile with bloodshot, flaming eyes that were almost insane. At the crucial time, the priest's clear but muffled voice said, "Si vis, dic volo." If you wish, say I will. The heavenly silence was broken by a rumbling roar that sprang from Ridge's soul. No! With a sound like a gunshot, the huge wood chapel doors blasted inward and crashed against the stone walls. Each person's head turned abruptly, sending shockwaves of gasps across the crowd. With his fancy clothes rumpled from travel and desperation, Ridge stood framed in the glaring rectangle of sunlight, looking wild-eyed and unkempt. He resembled a natural force unleashed, a hurricane embodied, driven by love that had grown toxic and possessive, rather than the stylish fashion mogul. His hoarse and harsh voice reverberated off the vaulted ceiling, drowning out the priest's shock. "Stop this wedding," he exclaimed. "Brooke! You can't do this. This is wrong." Nick was the first to respond, his body coiling with enraged tension as he instinctively stepped protectively in front of Brooke. He said, "Ridge! Get out! You have no right to be here," in a low, menacing voice that had the icy calm of a man about to explode. Ridge brushed him aside, focusing his laser-like attention just on Brooke, who stood motionless, her face pale, the moments carefully crafted tranquilly wiped out. Her eyes met his, wide with surprise and a growing sense of terror. "Ridge," she said in a whisper, bewildered in the unexpected commotion. Ridge roared, "I have every right," as he strode down the aisle like a vindictive angel, his resolute footsteps scattering rose petals. The visitors flinched, with Hope holding RJ's arm and wearing a terrified and incredulous expression. He made wild gestures towards Nick, the altar, and the shocked priest, saying, "You belong with me, Brooke. This farce, instead. It's a betrayal of everything we are. Of our history, our family, our souls." Nick tightened his hands and tried to block Ridge's way. The chapel's decorum was completely destroyed, and the threat hung thick in the air. "You lost, Ridge. She chose me. Now get out before I throw you out." Ridge remained unflinching. He came to a halt just inches away from Nick, their gazes locked in a primordial struggle for control. Ridge spit out, "You stole her," in a voice that was shaking with poisonous rage. He lunged around Nick instead of at him, his hand extending like a viper and bruisingly seizing Brooke's wrist. "You took advantage of a moment of weakness, of confusion. But it ends now," he said. Brooke let out a piercing cry of fear and agony. "Ridge! Let go! You're hurting me!" With desperate pools of pain and rage in his eyes, Ridge shouted, "Like you're hurting me?" He jerked her forward, knocking her off balance and away from Nick and the altar. "Like you're destroying us? Come on, Brooke! Wake up," he said. Time appeared to break. With quick speed, Nick grabbed Ridge's arm and attempted to pry his fingers away from Brooke. "Get your hands off her," the two men squabbled, throwing a candelabra over with a clatter that sounded like falling bones as they danced violently and awkwardly among the pews. The grunts and shouts drowned out Brooke's sobs as she was sucked roughly between them, her wedding dress ripping at the shoulder. Hope yelled, "Ridge! Nick! Stop!" as she rushed forward, but a guest stopped her. Brooke glanced wildly between the two men. Ridge was a man consumed by the justice of his cause, and his face was a mask of complete, terrifying conviction. Nick's face was twisted with the fear of losing her and protective rage. Brooke saw not only the guys but also the futures they stood for in that moment of halted pandemonium. Ridge, the all-consuming flames, the well-known pain, the LA battleground, and the force she believed she had fled. Nick, the love that promised liberation from the past, the shelter she'd long sought, the sun-drenched tranquility, and the soft strength. Ridge took advantage of Nick's brief attention to Brooke's anguish to yank his arm away and give him a forceful shove that sent Nick reeling back into a pew. Ridge grabbed his opportunity in the midst of Nick's confusion. He didn't inquire. He didn't beg. He took action. Ignoring her protesting scream and the ripping of the fragile silk, he grabbed Brooke's body off her feet with a power that sprang from desperation. Brooke shouted, hammering pointlessly on his chest, "Ridge! Put me down! Nick!" Her veil snagged and tore free, dropping to the stone floor like a dashed dream. With a dreadful determination on his face, Ridge held her tightly like a trapped wife. With Brooke writhing in his arms, he turned and rushed not back down the aisle but towards a tiny, antiquated side door that the sacristan used. "You're coming with me, Brooke. Back where you belong," Brooke cried, her fear now overshadowing her rage. "No! No! Ridge, please," she cried. "Don't do this! Let me go!" Stunned people and overturned chairs temporarily obstructed Nick's path as he charged forward, shouting Ridge's name. Brooke's cries reverberated hauntingly back into the broken chapel as Ridge smashed through the side door and vanished into the dazzling Tuscan sunlight outside. Nick's ragged breaths, the visitors' whimpers, and the gentle crackle of the dropped candles were the only sounds to break the abrupt, deafening silence inside. For a moment, Nick stood motionless, gazing at the abandoned veil on the floor and the empty area where Brooke had been. Then he let forth a yell that shook the chapel's very stones, a visceral, animalistic wail of anger and sorrow. He whirled, looking at the confused, terrified faces before settling on Hope, who was completely ruined. He took her, Nick was choking as he gasped. He just took her. Colder than rejection, the truth hit him hard. This was kidnapping, not persuasion. Brooke hadn't made the decision to go, the man who wouldn't accept her decision had torn her away in the middle of her vow. In a few moments of furious, self-centered craziness, the tranquility, the future, and the precious promise were all destroyed. Nick hurried to the main doors without saying another word, his eyes flaming with rage. The guests hurried to avoid him. He rushed out onto the plaza and looked around wildly. 100 yards distant, he saw Ridge half dragging, half carrying a still struggling Brooke towards a waiting sports vehicle that was parked carelessly on the cobblestones, its tires whirling with dust. Nick's dress shoes slipped on the old stones as he fled, a man possessed. His cries, "Ridge! Stop!" Brooke, reverberated off the nearby stone structures. Ridge arrived at the vehicle. Ignoring Brooke's sobs, he literally pushed her inside after yanking the passenger door open. He locked the door and slammed it. From within, Brooke banged wildly on the window, her face a mask of rage and fear smeared with tears. Ridge yanked the door open and ran around to the driver's side. Driven by desperation and adrenaline, Nick was getting closer. "Let her out, you bastard." Ridge took a quick look back and locked eyes with Nick for a single, intense moment. There was only a savage, desperate resolve, no victory. He gunned the engine, slammed the door, and slipped into the driver's seat. As it lurched forward in a cloud of dust and fumes, the powerful automobile surged to life, its tires shrieking against the cobblestones. As the car began to accelerate away, Nick skidded to a stop, briefly capturing Brooke's pale, desperate face through the passenger window before the car fishtailed around a corner and disappeared down the winding hill road, leaving behind only the swirling dust and the dying scream of the engine as they settled slowly on the sunlit piazza. In the abrupt, awful silence, Nick stood by himself, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles were white, his chest heaving. The happy bells that ought to have rung for Brooke's nuptials did not. The debris inside the chapel was visible through the open doors, the candles, the overturned chairs, and the abandoned ivory veil that lay on the cold stone floor like a shroud. Hope died, crashing into him and crying violently. He was defeated. It was Ridge's violent stealing, not Brooke's decision. Italy's refuge had been breached. It broke the promise of peace. Carried away like a treasure in a careless, daytime kidnapping, Brooke was gone, not to her future, but back into the whirlpool of Ridge Forrester's compulsive, toxic love. Once a sign of hope, the Tuscan sun ruthlessly pounded the crime scene, spotlighting a kidnapping rather than a wedding. The fight for Brooke Logan had just entered a new, terrifying, and lawless phase, but it was far from over. Nick was certain that Ridge would stop at nothing in his insanity as he stared down the deserted road where the automobile had vanished. Brooke wasn't secure. As she hurtled down an Italian hillside towards an unpredictable and likely deadly future, she was a prisoner of the past. The icy sound of screeching tires and Brooke's dying, unanswered cries took the place of the unspoken vows. Ridge traveled through Italy to follow his destiny. It started with a whisper carried on the warm Italian breeze, a rumor, a hope, a haunting tug in Ridge Forrester's chest that told him he wasn't too late, that somewhere in the cobblestone streets of Florence, the misty cliffs of Positano, or the sun-drenched coastlines of Carpi, his destiny was still within reach, not waiting like a patient promise but moving, elusive, alive. Just like the woman who held his heart even when she didn't want it anymore, Brooke Logan, and from the moment he stepped off the private Forrester jet in Rome, suit wrinkled, heart pounding, jaw clenched with regret and fire. Ridge knew this wasn't going to be another vacation filled with fashion meetings and red carpet smiles. This was a chase, a battle for his soul, and for the one woman who had been both his salvation and destruction 1,000 times over, and whom he had once again managed to lose because of pride, because of hesitation, because when it mattered most, he didn't leap, and now she was here, somewhere in Italy, walking through ruins, whispering prayers in old churches, dipping her toes into blue water like she was trying to rinse the memory of him from her skin, and Ridge couldn't let that happen, not again, not when every missed call, every echo of destiny in his mind kept him awake at night, not when he had chosen safety over fire too many times and finally realized fire was where he lived, where he breathed, where he belonged, and that fire had a name, Brooke, for she had come to Italy alone, after the last confrontation with Ridge in L.A. Left her in tears, after she told him, voice hoarse and breaking, "I don't believe you anymore," and then boarded a plane without telling a soul where she was going, wanting peace, distance, escape, but fate doesn't respect distance, and neither did Ridge's heart, because with every step through the villas and vineyards, he asked strangers if they'd seen her, showed photos to concierge desks, scoured every corner of Venice, Florence, and finally Carpi, where he'd once taken her during a stolen romantic weekend years ago, thinking maybe, just maybe, she'd return to a memory she once held close, and when he finally found her, barefoot in the sand at the edge of a secluded cove in Carpi, her blonde hair billowing in the breeze like something out of a dream, he didn't call her name at first, he just watched, heart aching, stunned by the simple beauty of her solitude, her strength, her silent rebellion against everything they had been through, and then she turned, slowly, as if sensing him. And their eyes locked across the waves and the past, and Ridge stepped forward, breathless, the words bubbling out of him in a rush he could no longer contain. I chased you all through Italy, Logan. I followed my destiny. Brooke laughed, not with delight but with astonishment, exhaustion, and that bone-deep pain of a woman who had heard it all before and had scars to show it. Ridge continued, her voice full of emotion, getting closer with each sentence. You can be angry. You ought to be. I should have hung on, but I let you go. I should have spoken up for you, but instead I played it safe. I thought I needed peace, so I ran to Taylor, but without passion, serenity is merely silence. You are what I long for, the chaos, the beauty, the crazy. I didn't come here to convince you with words, I came because I couldn't breathe not knowing where you were, because every step I took through Rome, every train I boarded, every wrong turn I made, it was all leading me here, to you. Brooke's lip trembled, the fortress she built beginning to fracture as Ridge poured years of silence into the sand between them, and though she wanted to scream, to throw his old promises back in his face, her heart betrayed her, remembering every kiss in Tuscany, every vow in Monte Carlo, every night under the Italian stars where he swore she was his one and only, because in truth, she hadn't come to Italy to forget Ridge. She'd come to see if the version of her that once believed in love still existed, and now he stood here, broken and brilliant, the man she hated and loved all at once, chasing her through a country built on romance like some operatic confession, and when he reached out, trembling, waiting for rejection, she didn't take his hand right away, but she didn't turn away either, she whispered instead, "Why now, Ridge? Why is it always too late?" And his answer was simple, raw, "Because this time, it's not too late, unless you let it be." And that was the turning point, the spark that ignited the years of buried longing, and suddenly they were in each other's arms, sobbing and kissing and holding on as if the Mediterranean itself might pull them apart again, and over the next days, they walked through vineyards hand in hand, revisited the chapel where Ridge had once vowed to never let her go, danced barefoot to street musicians in Verona, and made love under the stars on a terrace above the cliffs, rediscovering every part of each other with reverence and hunger, and though Ridge had made countless mistakes, though Brooke had built walls to protect herself, something about this trip, the chase, the passion, the honesty, stripped them bare, made them realize that destiny isn't a fixed path but a choice they had to keep making, again and again, and this time, they chose it not because they had to, but because they wanted to, and when they returned to Los Angeles weeks later, sun-kissed and utterly transformed, the reactions ranged from stunned silence to disbelief to tearful support, but Ridge didn't care anymore what anyone thought, not Taylor, not Eric, not even his children, because for the first time in years, he knew who he was and who he wanted, and her name was Brooke Logan, the woman he chased not just across Italy, but across time, regret, and redemption, proving that even the most complicated love stories can find their way back home, if someone is brave enough to run after them.